Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. From the BBC World Service, this is The Global Story. Today, are teens in Australia about to get kicked off social media? Parents across the world know this predicament. Social media networks can be a huge part of teenage life, a place to speak to friends and join communities. But it's also a place where harmful content can repeatedly impact young people. So how can we keep our teens safe on these platforms? In today's episode, Australia wants to ban teens under the age of 16 from using social media networks. But will it work? With me today is the BBC cyber correspondent Joe Tidy and our Australia correspondent joining us from Sydney, Katy Watson. Hi to you both.
Hi.
Joe, I think, because I have teenagers, that social media is a bit like a runaway train in a land I've never been to. And I just really want the train to pull over and give me a bit of a break. It is a constant topic of conversation in my house.
Is that because the kids want to be on there all the time? They're saying, give me my phone late at night, that kind of thing?
The kids want to be on there all the time.
Yeah.
That is where they're talking to their friends. That's where they're making plans, making arrangements. Everything from a sports practice to meeting up, to socialising. It's all happening on social media.
It's no surprise though, is it? Because these platforms have become the biggest companies in the world because of how successful they are. They know how to keep us on the platform. They've got very, very specific and very sophisticated algorithms that know that if you dwell on a picture, oh, you might like that kind of content, let's give you more of that. They know that, for example, when you get a like, it feels good. Or when you get a message, it makes you feel loved. So it's no surprise, is it, that young people, even more so than us, are addicted to social media.
And what about your kids, Katy? They're a bit smaller, but has it made you think about what you're going to do about social media as they grow up?
Well, I think I'm in the privileged situation of watching everybody with slightly older kids. My eldest is 8, and so I can see everybody else who've got early teens panicking, and I can take a view or certainly start debating and discussing it with my partner. I think no, none of them are on social media. They sometimes look at what I do, but really I'm in probably a good place right now to but I've got to make decisions, and I've got to have that kind of authority of what my plan is. And at the moment, I'm still formulating that one.
Have you formulated a strategy with yours, Joe? They're small too, but
yeah, my eldest is 10 today. I've got 2 others who are younger, so I'm in the same position really. I'm waiting to have those conversations. Luckily, they're not happening yet. And my boy is obsessed with football and likes to be outside, and loves gaming. I have to restrict the gaming, but phones, social media, I'm not there yet. So any advice from you would be great.
Okay, I've got lots of it. But let's have a look at what Australia is proposing.
This is about protecting young people, not punishing or isolating them, and letting parents know we're in their corner when it comes to supporting their children's health and well-being.
That's Australia's Communications Minister, Michelle Rowland. She says the ban is going to cover platforms like TikTok, X, Facebook and Instagram. Not that many teens are actually on Facebook, I have to say. But it's about protecting young people from the harms of social media. Katy, tell us a little bit more about what the Australian government is saying and what they're planning.
This has made huge waves in Australia because of the age 16. That was seen as a high age, a big discussion about whether that was even going to be feasible. What the main thing is that parents aren't going to be penalised. Neither are any teens who slip through the net and get social media accounts, but effectively there'll be no exceptions. Not even if parents agree and say that they want their kids, they're okay with their kids having a social media account, that they can't do that. But the onus will be on the companies and the platforms to come up with ways of making sure that those under 16s are kept safe. And this is the thing, at the moment it is a legal framework. So, the legislation is passing, but it's not clear exactly how it's going to be implemented. And it will still have a year from the legislation passing to coming up with a solution on how it's going to work. And a year at least that can be negotiated. So it's a big process, and there's lots and lots of question marks about how it's going to work in practice.
I mean, how it's going to work was the big question I had when I heard about it, because keeping your kid off social media if they really want to be on there, aside from actually taking the device, away from them could prove almost impossible. Has the government got some suggestions about how you actually are going to stop kids from logging on?
There's discussions about age verification. How would that work? Will that mean everybody has to upload their ID, whether or not they're under 16? There's so many question marks. And the other thing is that messaging services, gaming sites, none of those are going to be restricted. Some sites, for example, that you would access for health or education purposes, they won't be restricted. And I spoke to one young influencer who was just like, it's just a bunch of old people who are making up rules for young people who know far more about it.
Just angry old people like, ban social media. But now this is becoming a threat. This only affects me, not the people making this law, not at all.
You're taking choices away from young people. And these are choices that they have grown up with, that they understand, that they navigate quicker and better.
It's not really good for communities and stuff, because some people need to have communities online.
Honestly, I think it's a good thing. There's a lot of really terrible influences online, more so than good ones.
Jo, we're going to be talking a lot about teenagers as consumers of social media, but teenagers are also wonderful creators of content when it comes to some of these platforms as well, and that's had a big impact.
Yeah, I think the social networks want the kids on their platforms because often, as you say, it's vibrant, it's creative. Some of the best memes and GIFs and online trends have come from very young people on these platforms. And some of the most fun that you can have on the internet is on these networks. For example, TikTok. Some of the stuff that we saw on TikTok in the last couple of years, the joke is that it takes 3 or 4 weeks for that to eventually end up on Instagram because it does start on these platforms where kids populate. And social networks know that, and they want their creators to be young and have a long future of building content that people are going to be interested in. And what's interesting as well is that if you look at what's happening in what some, including Mark Zuckerberg from Meta, will argue is the next stage in our technological entertainment, the metaverse, so VR headsets, they've actually lowered the age. They've now lowered it to 10 in America and Canada. And if you go on those platforms, I feel very, very old now going into some of these rooms and these experiences and Horizon worlds because it's all kids there, and that's where they see the future of these platforms being. So you can see the kind of the strain that the social networks and these companies are under. If they somehow get rid of the children, how are they going to get them into the social networks that are going to help them create the next generation of content creators?
If you speak to parents around the world, most would acknowledge that they're worried that their teenagers are spending too much time on these social media platforms, and that's concerning, particularly as we start to learn more about the impact that is having on them. What are some of the things that actually do concern you when you look at what some teens are consuming?
There's no denying that algorithms push people towards extremes. We now know that. We've had 20 years of social networks and there's been so much research that's been done on it. So, for example, if you look at a macho type account, maybe you're going to be given more of that. Maybe it's going to lead you down a path of, misogyny or incel culture in some ways, and particularly with young boys, we see that kind of thing. Likewise with women more in particular, we see if you look at body image type imagery or videos or content, that will push you eventually down to potential issues of how you feel about how you look and potentially eating disorders, that kind of thing. We know those issues are there. But then there's lots of other things that we're still not sure about. So, for example, is there such thing as social media addiction? Is there such thing as gaming addiction? There's a lot of this discussion, a lot of these words are being bandied around right now about children being addicted. I said it earlier, didn't I, just off the cuff? But there's no real evidence to say that those are actual real addictions. There's a gaming addiction therapy centre in the UK that was opened, and that was very controversial because scientists say, well, actually, is it an addiction? And there are other places, other research that says that actually social networks are really good for children because it brings them together. We mentioned earlier, Katy said about, particularly if you're, for example, LGBT, queer or trans, you need that kind of community. You need to find your people. So the dangers of social media are there. Some of them we know about, and there seems to be not enough happening to solve them. And some are still kind of debated about whether or not they're good or bad for you.
And so do we know, or has research been done about what regular social media use does? Because I think that'll be a lot of the concerns that parents will be expressing, is just about the daily use of social media and how much time their kids are spending on social media.
Well, the research says that if everything else in your life is stable and good, then social media is good because it's another way to socialize, open up your world horizons, that kind of thing. But when you add that into a situation where perhaps you haven't got a stable home life or you're being bullied at school or something like that, then it can just compound problems and make things worse. There's no hard and fast rules that I've seen in research that says if you spend more than 2 hours a day as a teenager on social networks, you're going to have mental health problems. There's nothing that concrete out there. But the thing about all of this is you only have to ask a parent when you look at your kid absorbed in their phone for hours and hours a day, perhaps starting to feel bad about how they look or things like that, and you feel like anecdotally it cannot be a good thing.
Or that it's preventing them from doing other things.
Yeah.
The amount of time I hear parents say, get outside, get a ball, go and play, get off your phone, get off your phone. You hear it time and time again. Mm-hmm. Is there an argument that teenage years should also be when teens are learning to navigate online spaces safely? So if they get to 16 and they're in Australia and they've got no experience of this, that's a bit dangerous.
That's one of the arguments that we're hearing on this is that if you're suddenly launched into the internet at the age of 16 and you haven't got much experience, would you know how to spot, for example, AI imagery? The prevalence now of models that are artificially intelligence created, would you be aware of that kind of thing because it's something that you haven't had experience of? There was some research done by a university in the UK about Chinese, not just social media bans, but the bans of smartphones and devices at a certain sort of time of night. And they are saying that it's a good thing to take the devices away and then they can go out and they can play, and it's less sedentary lifestyle, that kind of thing. And they said that a 10% reduction in screen time means 10 more minutes of playing outside or something. So they would argue, the researchers, that kind of experience of playing and socializing face-to-face makes up for a lack of technical knowledge, for example.
Are these some of the arguments, Katy, that you're hearing particularly from parents in Australia?
When the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, announced it back in September, he said, we want people back on the footy fields, out and doing things, like a kind of typical childhood. And I spoke to one expert who said, but why? That's such a kind of attitude that everybody's good at sport. I mean, on a personal level, my son hates football. He's not into social media either. But like, there's this assumption that childhood is the same as it was when you were young, and that is that. So that doesn't mean that you might not, go out and enjoy a good walk, and we all know that's really good for health as well. But this idea that it's better to be in sport than it is to be online is a huge assumption that everybody's sporty and liking that. And we all know that there are plenty of kids in their youth who hated being part of sports and team sports like that as well. So if you spoke anecdotally to parents, especially parents of kind of similar age to my children, the view is, oh, well, at least it kicks a can down the road, so that when our kids go, I want to have a social media account, we can go, oh, you can't now because the government doesn't let you. And also everyone's on the same playing field. It's a level playing field, so that it's not that some people are allowed to because their parents let them and others don't. Legally, nobody's allowed to. So there's a kind of initial, well, great, that's one extra tool. But then when you dig down, and certainly I've spoken to plenty of experts, and I haven't found one like tech expert who thinks it's a good thing.
So we've established that there's a problem. The Australian government is trying to provide a solution. This was the view of one online safety educator.
The big reason that I am pro-ban is because we're having conversation about it. And if the collective total of world governments look at this as a positive move, and maybe they'll do it, and that pressure goes back towards those companies or changes in legislation in the US, that's also going to be a really positive thing.
So that's Cara Pendergast. She heads up an online safety education company in Australia. She speaks to thousands of students every week. But Jo, tell us a bit more about what the challenges are going to be in banning under-16s in this way. How practically difficult is it going to be?
Well, one thing I think we should sort of bear in mind here is that you have to be 13 to be on these social networks, but that doesn't stop under-13s going on right now. So the issue is, you put in a 16 age limit, how is that enforced? Because at the moment, of course, you go onto a TikTok or an Instagram and you just say, oh, I'm 18 or 19, when you're not, very clearly. And there's no checks or balances there. It's just literally you put your date of birth in and they say, there you go. Ofcom, the Office Communications here in the UK, a survey they've done says that 1 in 5 children are lying about their age to get on social networks. In fact, it's 22%, so a bit more than 1 in 5. So that goes to show that the current restrictions of 13 just simply don't work. So if you bring in a 16, or in France, they've been really trying to get a 15 age limit going on there, you have to then have the kind of the law in place. And as Katy said, the onus in Australia will be that the technology companies have to be the ones that check. So how are they going to do that? Well, they could use, for example, facial recognition systems where you scan your face and it has a rough guess at your age, which may or may not be accurate. What's really interesting in this is that actually the ones that I've used are really accurate. I was mucking around on TikTok a few months ago, and there's a filter that you can use to guess your age, and it got me exact, and it got my wife exact. But what's funny is they're not using that.
I don't think I want to use that.
But if we're playing around with this tech as a filter that's made by some independent company that might make some money from it, why isn't TikTok already implementing that? And we do see that, for example, in China with their ban that they've had on gaming and online use late at night. It does make a difference, but it's not being used elsewhere. So when you bring in a ban on 16s or under, you have to then have something like that in place.
And also, these teenagers are so savvy when it comes to tech. Surely they're just going to get a VPN and get around it.
Yeah, we did see that, particularly in France with the ban there. You can just get a VPN and say you can pretend you're logging in from a different country where there is no ban, so you can get around the issues. But then I think the thing to bear in mind in here is as well, though, that if you add friction, so let's say you bring in the ban, but you can circumvent it with VPN, that is another step. That is another step that children will have to take to get around it. So that will knock out a certain number of people. It's whether or not you want 100%, success rate.
Katy, what else are people who are criticising this ban saying? What are their other concerns?
A lot of the experts I've spoken to have kind of expressed a lot of disappointment that they were like, we've talked about this, we've advised the government, and yet nothing seems to have gone through on anything that we have suggested, and they've even pointed to the fact that the kind of UN also doesn't really say ban it. It's about the human rights is to kind of educate and give access to. It's a really, really hard law to implement, I think, and because it's still so much a framework, there's so many unanswered questions on this. So it's very much a headline grabber, but really getting down to the nitty gritty, we'll see in the next year or so.
So the argument against this ban would be, well, hang on a minute, instead of blocking children from going onto dangerous places, make those dangerous places less dangerous. And of course, that is even more onus on the technology companies to do that. But it can happen. It can be done. If you look at Douyin in China, for example, which is the Chinese equivalent of TikTok, which is owned by the same company, ByteDance. They own both TikTok around the entire world and then Douyin in China. Douyin is exactly the same as TikTok, but it is very, very different in terms of the content that is displayed to young people on that app. It's all about science. It's all about math. They have big campaigns about social well-being and how to be a good citizen.
There must be teens dancing as well.
Yeah. There'll be a bit of that as well. But it's a very different experience. And I think some people in the camp of this is wrong, don't ban kids, make technology companies do more, would look at Douyin as an example of that being possible.
Well, let's have a look at how the tech companies are responding, because Elon Musk wrote that this Australia ban was backdoor control of the internet. How are the other platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, how are they reacting?
They're all dead against it, as you can imagine. The main argument from them is that we need more time. We need to talk about this properly, because I think Katy mentioned earlier, it is a bit of a rush. What's happening in Australia is going through quite fast. And the technology companies, rightly or wrongly, are saying, pause, slow down, let's look at the science, let's look at the research, let's look at the evidence that there are harms out there for children. And also, let's look at whether or not the verification systems will actually work. How is it actually going to work? We are seeing some interesting developments of having technology companies have youth-related apps. So you can have you've seen, for example, on YouTube, you've got main YouTube, and then you've got kids YouTube, which is meant to be, and is, to be fair, a more moderated and protected version. So it's that making the swimming pool safer for children. That's the kind of argument there. And we might see that rolled out more widely, where you have a kids Instagram, a version of TikTok, and the others.
So, Katy, headlines all over the world. Lots of people are talking about it, parents particularly. Do people in Australia think this is going to succeed?
I think a lot of people are questioning whether it will really succeed, even though those for and against are thinking like they just don't really understand how it could possibly work. So no, I think a lot of people are wanting to wait and see exactly how this will play out. And to pick up on Joe's point, so the tech companies, the onus is on them to comply, but they will face penalties of as much as 50 million Australian dollars. So that's about 26 million pounds, 33 million US dollars. So if they don't comply, that's, you know, the top penalty they can get. But there will be some exemptions. So if they're able to create low risk services, so more kid friendly services, then that might kind of help their case. But again, all of this is still the detail. It is yet to be defined, but certainly there's a kind of a motivation there to try and make these platforms more kid friendly.
Well, the whole world is watching Australia on this one. Katy, thank you so much. Joe, good to have you with us here. Thank you for watching. If you want more episodes of The Global Story, you can find them wherever you get your BBC podcasts from. Don't forget as well to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We do love hearing from you, so if you have comments on today's episode, you can leave us a message in the box below. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.